Okay, so we are Sara Clark and
Heidi Hubler.
from WSU, Cowlitz County Master Gardeners, and this is planning your seed starting schedule. But we do have a disclaimer, which is there's no way we could tell you everything when to plant it and for what situations for every place, for especially every place that people are from here. But what we can do is give you access to information. So let's see if this will go. Okay, I see how I have to do it. Okay. So this is a picture of our website, and that little link down there, https / etc., is our website. And when you go there, you will see these tiles, and depending on what version is available on the day, you will see somewhere that says Learn with Us. And this slideshow will be underneath that thing. And sometimes it's across the top of the page, and sometimes this is in the little box like this. So you get to be a little flexible in finding things there.
So Sara, you're not in slide mode.
I'm
If you
not in
go down to the
slide mode.
bottom, you'll see a little, yep, from the beginning. Now you are. There you go.
Oh, now we're so happy. Thank you for telling me that. Okay. So that website is worth writing down because that's where you get access to every single one of those things. And this particular slideshow happens to be located in the vegetable section, and I drew a box around it. So the most important information from the entire show is that website. So hopefully you won't all sign off and disappear because we have more to say. Okay, Heidi?
All right, let's go. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about when you should plant your seeds. We're going to be talking about growing zones, seed and seed packets, how to read the seed packet, direct planting or transplants, succession planting, extending the growing season. We're going to have some specific examples about when to plant your seeds. We're going to talk about winter gardening, and then we'll have a little summary at the tail end.
Turn the page. It's not easy. Okay, so many of you are fairly familiar with this particular USDA plant hardiness zone map. For example, over here in eastern Washington, it's mainly zone 6, and over here west of the Cascades, it's mostly zone 8. Interestingly, though, zone 8 for those of us here in Cowlitz County is actually the same hardiness zone as northern Florida. But of course, we don't grow the same plants in the summertime as northern Florida, so there's another map that's useful. So this is the American Horticultural Society heat zone map, and this map is probably less familiar to you. It's a map that tells you specifically about growing plants in summer, and is a map of how many days on average above 86 degrees Fahrenheit an area has. So you can see here in eastern Washington, if you look carefully, it's a slightly darker number. It's typically between zone 6 and 5, and folks from that part of our state will typically have 35 to 40 days above 86. But over here in Cowlitz County, it's a lighter color, and this zone has many fewer days above 86. Those of us at higher elevations are probably even closer to zone 3. But most of this is zone 4. So you'll notice now that northern Florida, which on the other map was the same as where we have, is actually zone 9, because they have about 135 days that are average above 86. And plants really love heat to grow. So we have to take this into consideration when you're planning when to plant your plants, and whether it is planning to do direct seeding or when to start your transplants. So we actually need both of these maps to make these decisions. Our first map mostly tells you then, what about perennials? Because it's more about, will it survive the winter? And the second map tells you much more about determining if your vegetables and annuals will grow well in the summer, and how many days you actually might have to have for growing those. Okay, Heidi.
All right. So one of the things that gardeners should know is going to be soil temperature. Your soil temperature dictates when germination is going to occur with your seeds and how fast your plants are going to grow. So we need to go to the next, oops, there's our list. And there's our thermometer. So, I mean, you don't have to run out and buy anything fancy, expensive. This is, I think Sara said, what, $10 online. So something that is going to go up high enough, though, so you can see the temperature, and maybe you could use it for your compost too. So if it's a higher enough temperature, but just kind of see what's going on in there. The soil temperature last week here in Longview was 41 degrees, and which is still pretty cold. It's a good idea to keep track on a calendar, or if you have a book for planning, kind of keep track of that and see what your soil temperature is over time. We have a disclaimer from the beginning, but we just want to repeat: every garden is unique. Even your own property in town, you will have a different area in your yard that's unique. You might have a different soil on each part in different parts of your yard. And then those of you that are watching, of course, you're living in different areas of the state, and you'll have other, different amounts of rainfall. So just kind of getting to know your own yard. You might have a sunny part of your yard and one that's more shady, but we're going to focus mainly on temperature, soil temperature, and even again within our county, people are going to have different soil temperatures at different times. So we get our little temperature chart here. There's a lot of stuff on here, and sorry for the tiny print, but don't panic. We'll be sharing everything in the summaries. You'll have access to this. This is just to kind of give you an idea of the difference in all the different plants have a little, a lot of them are happy at certain temperatures and others are happy at other temperatures. So it's just minimum soil temperatures for germination. You'll notice that like lettuce, onion, parsnip, and spinach, they're going to germinate once your soil temperature is at 35, but the optimum temperature for germination for plant growth is much warmer and closer to 70. So just because your seeds will germinate, it doesn't mean that they will grow well. However, it is kind of interesting to know the minimum temperature for germination. So like beets, carrots, peas, they want to see 40 degrees before germination. So that's why it's a good idea to keep track. But again, your plants really won't grow well just because they're germinating. So we're going to look at asparagus and corn and tomatoes. They want to see 50 degrees if you're direct planting the seeds before they'll germinate. So keep track of what that minimum is.
And I'm going to jump in here for a quick second and remind people that the birds love to pull corn plants out of the ground and eat that seed. So it's always a good idea to start those as little transplants. And as soon as they get some pretty hefty green on them and the seed is kind of less, then if you put them out, then you have less of them being yanked out of the ground. So just to keep in mind.
Birds do like seeds. I do. You're right.
That is so true.
So beans, for a summer direct seeding of our crops, minimum soil temperature for germination is all the way up to 60. So things like peppers and tomatoes, it's probably better to do transplants instead of direct planting for those crops because of our growing season length.
So one of the things that we pay attention to
is
the base temperature.
Go get your basket.
And here is a chart that's all about the base temperatures, which is this is the point where maybe you started your plants and then it gets colder again. So when do your plants maybe freak out and stop growing? This chart shows that below these specific temperatures, all growth stops for that plant. And you can see they're mostly 40 and above. I don't know if you can see it. We'll just take a look. So beans, that would be 50, cucumbers 55, peppers 50, and tomatoes 51. So that may be when you plant them a little earlier in June and it doesn't quite get warm enough and it looks like your tomatoes have just gone into hibernation. That's why. You really don't want to approach this because you don't want your plants to stop growing because it puts a lot of stress on the plants. And if you're planting plants that are close to these base temperatures and then they go into hibernation and then they start up again and then they stop again and back and forth, that really, really puts a lot of stress on the plant. So you want to see if you can time it quite better.
Okay.
There you go.
We're going to look at picking out some seeds. Once you kind of have an idea about your garden and the soil temperature needs of the plants you want to plant, it's time to start looking at these seeds. I know there's a lot of stuff on the seed package here. So one of the key parts of making your schedule is called looking at the section days to maturity. So in our area, we need seeds that are going to mature faster than in warmer areas. Remember earlier we talked about our growing season is shorter here than in some areas of the country. So we want it to be considerably shorter. So like on the back of the packet, we have 70 days to harvest. So this is great for our area, but if you're on the east side, you might want to pick varieties that have longer days to maturity. This packet, if you're really observant, happens to be for sweet peppers. And the 70 days are counted from the day you transplant a start, not direct seed, from when you transplant a start. This is also true for tomatoes. So you want to figure out into your schedule the time it takes to grow a transplant from these seeds. And we'll talk a little bit later about transplanting versus direct seeding and the benefits and disadvantages of each option. So where do you get your seeds that are specific for your area? On our side and here in our county, there are some sample of some seeds available from seed catalogs that are designed to be more successful in our short growing season. We've got Ed Hume, Nichols Garden Nursery, Salt Spring, Territorial, West Coast Seeds, and Wild Garden Seeds. These companies specialize in the Maritime Northwest, but you want to become familiar with seed companies and varieties that are specific for your zone. And then we're going to do a little note about tomatoes. So the days to maturity are actually the days after transplanting. So in your planning, you need to think about the days it will take you to grow your tomatoes and peppers to the stage where they can be transplanted.
And one of the things on our side we are often asked is, how do I get a ripe red tomato? They grow lots of tomatoes, but they end up being quite green. So there is an actual program on our website called How to Grow a Ripe Tomato in the Pacific Northwest. It's recorded, and you can go to that Learn With Us section on our website, and you should check it out. All right. And I could also put in a shameless plug for our plant sale on May 11th. And you don't have to grow your own. We will grow them for you. So as you can see, we have hundreds of plants at our plant sale on May 11th, all different kinds, not just tomatoes and peppers, flowers, house plants, all kinds of things. So maybe write that date down and realize that that's going to give you plenty of time to plant tomatoes. You don't have to plant them earlier than that anyway. Okay, transplanting versus direct seeding. Assuming that you have a choice. Tomatoes, you have to grow transplants. Peppers, you have to grow transplants. But what about if you're standing there and you're thinking, maybe I should try a transplant with this, or no, maybe I should try direct seeding. Is there any way to make that decision? Before you can decide this, you need to ask yourself an extremely key question. And the question is your garden ready? Because it's all very good to talk about planting your garden, but if it's not ready to go when you are, that's a huge problem. Many of us have garden spaces right now that are full of weeds, and they're probably full of cold, wet mud right now. So before you plant, you need to prepare your ground, and you need to fit it into your plan. One way is to because that in the spring, waiting for that soil to dry out can really delay your planting. You can get your garden ready in your area, cover it with plastic in the fall, and then in the spring, you just peel back the plastic and plant. And that is an excellent idea. So, of course, there's somebody listening going, but I didn't do that. Well, you can always go out and cover it with plastic right now, and it probably would warm the soil up and would dry it out a little bit. So you could try that. But just put it in your plans for next fall. It's very, very valuable to do. So what about direct seeding? There are advantages because you're only planting it once. We hope, unless you're like me, the birds pulled my seeds out all spring last year. That was very frustrating. You don't have to take weeks to take care of the transplants, and you're not limited by your greenhouse space. And it's less effort because you don't have to haul tons of transplants out to the garden. Seeds are easier to carry. So some plants actually prefer direct seeding too, except plants that have tap roots like carrots, they really don't like being moved. So you would plant them direct seed no matter what. Although I'm sure there's someone here who has transplanted carrots. It's just really kind of not the best plan. Okay, are there any disadvantages to direct seeding? Well, assuming your garden is ready, you have less control of the early growing period. So if you're growing it in a greenhouse, you probably don't have thousands of slugs waiting to eat your little transplants. And the climate may not cooperate. This was April 6th of 2022, and it was ridiculously cold and snowy on that day. So the climate may not follow your plans. And of course, you are more dictated by your zone and your temperature, and you have a lot less control, and this typically means you have a shorter growing season. So maybe transplanting is for you. What's a good thing about it, Heidi?
It extends your season because you are all ready to rock. It allows you to grow the varieties with longer days to maturity. Many of the popular, like the older varieties, have longer ripening times and they just taste better, according to some people. According to me, you can do succession planting too, where you have an area that you've been growing something and it's all done. You can take out your finished crop and plant transplants of something else to get more out of a smaller garden plot. And it could save money. I mean, if you grow these transplants yourself, you don't have to go buy them at the store. It's a lot less expensive to have those seed packets. And then when you have your little pots in your seed pack containers, you can reuse those every year. So, but there are some disadvantages too. You do need enough light and heat, and it does cost money to pay for the supplies, and of course to get things going with your plants. A sunning window can work, but overhead lighting that you can move closer and further away is generally better. Space can be limited unless you have a big greenhouse, like this one. There is good news though. There's a lot of ways to overcome all these obstacles and still raise transplants. So we can make some suggestions here, like a baker's rack, put some lights in there. And then you can buy like a mini greenhouse. They have these like in town here at your local hardware store. They've got these different ones. You can get them online. Use lights and heating pads on a table in your basement or your garage. The big key is just to get the light on the top and some heat on the bottom. And then we can do succession gardening. So basically this is going to give you a continuous production in your garden. You're planting smaller amounts of the same crop every few weeks, so you can harvest smaller amounts all summer long. And as you can see, every so many days or weeks, you can start new seeds. If you plant radishes every 7 to 10 days, you can have smaller crops that supply you with a steady amount of young radishes that are not overgrown, lettuces and peas, spacing them out on a schedule. And then another kind of succession gardening is to just replace what was harvested with something new. So you'll have to have some spring plantings. They'll give you some summer harvest if you get some stuff in there. And that's the key. Harvest early, giving you your garden space back for that second crop. So like if you plant broccoli, you need to identify a variety of broccoli that has a short number of days to maturity. There's a couple examples here. So broccoli, but short days to maturity. Normally broccoli has about 70 days to maturity. With these, you could get a harvest from them in about 50 days. And then plant them again to get a second harvest in the fall. And something to just keep in mind with succession gardening, your days to maturity need to be 60 days or less. That way you can harvest early in the summer and replace with something else. And then we've got some examples here of things that are 60 days or less: cauliflower and broccoli, lettuce and pak choi, spinach, Swiss chard. Peas take about 60 days, but if you schedule carefully, you can plant 2 crops in one summer. Onions and garlic are harvested in July and August. And this opens up space in your garden where you can plant something else using varieties that have a shorter number of days to maturity. And then once you finish your early summer harvest, you can plant something new. For example, radishes, you might do 4 plantings in a year. You might plant a spot with radishes, plant it again, giving you a harvest in late April and then again in June. And then maybe in a different spot, you might put some radishes at the end of April and again in late May. So you've got them sprinkled in a couple places and they'll be ready at different times. And then these scheduled plantings allow you to harvest fresh radishes almost continuously from late April to the end of June. Of course, that makes sense if you really love radishes like I do.
And I really don't. So if radishes are not your thing, consider this following plan with peas. So you can plant in April and then follow that harvest with a second planting in that same spot in June. Okay, and so you have this one. And then in May, in another location, you could be growing peas planted in May and then again in July. So you have 2 different spots, and that alternates the harvest season. So you pretty much have fresh peas all summer and into the fall. And another example is using broccoli. And this requires transplants because they do take a while to grow. Maybe you just grow them off to the side in a pot and then transplant them in if it's warm enough, or maybe in a greenhouse. So once you harvest one broccoli plant, you can replace it with one of your transplants for a second crop. So it's important to choose varieties that have a shorter number of days to maturity. So because broccoli takes longer to mature, you would have some in April and then some in June. And that way you could harvest all the way from June to September. Crops like lettuce, cauliflower, and turnips can be pulled around June 20th, giving you space to grow something else. Bush beans can be planted, and they require a very warm soil to germinate. And cucumbers also require warm soil to germinate and for growth. These can be harvested mid-August through September. Okay, Heidi, can you take it from here?
Yep, I'm going. All right, so you can actually plant more radishes in those spots and harvest them later. The garlic that you planted last fall, that's going to be ready to pull by mid-July. So why not plant a summer squash in that part of the garden? I mean, if you grow transplants, you could plant the squash where the garlic had been and harvest squash into September and early October. And this is assuming that you have neighbors that are also going to take some of your extras because they do like to produce. So your storage onions will all be harvested by August 15th or so. So some short season turnips or more lettuce can be planted there. Or you can start some lettuce in the greenhouse to have ready to plant out in mid-August as transplants. And then you can harvest fresh lettuce through September. Spinach can be directly seeded in mid-August, and that'll be ready. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Ready in mid-August and harvested in September. Interesting, one of our master gardeners plants lettuce and spinach in the spring and again in the fall, and his crop is much better in the fall. Also, the spring crops tend to bolt while the fall crops do not. And then this is going to bring us to greenhouse gardening. Greenhouse gardening can really, really extend the season. And here's a list of vegetables that can be grown in the greenhouse even when the weather gets colder. So we've got, this is the greenhouse of one of our master gardeners. He has raised beds inside. He does direct seeding. They're 4 foot long, and the soil temperature is warm enough to plant about 6 weeks earlier than in the outside garden. So that's a big jump. On the day he took this picture, the soil temperature was about 70. And we've got some pictures of him working in the greenhouse with his early crops in the summer. He lives at 900 feet or so elevation, so having a greenhouse really helps extends his season. And then these are his little cucumbers he planted mid-May. He was actually able to harvest cucumbers 6 weeks earlier than in his outside garden. And then he planted beets in August. This is one of my favorite things to plant. I'm from Iowa, so been out here in Washington for 5 years, and beets grow in the summer, and that's it. Out here in my garden, I can have them out in my garden all year round, and when I'm ready for a beet, I'll go get a few. He planted beets in August for spring harvest. and he held them in the ground for about 8 months, and they were totally safe. And then here's the greenhouse in January with quite a bit of snow, and he still had his plants growing inside. And in May, he was pulling overwintered carrots from his raised beds from the greenhouse beds, and they were harvested about the same time as he was planting his summer carrots outside. And then at Thanksgiving, he was able to harvest ripe peppers and tomatoes. Can you imagine coming in for your dinner with your family that week and having all these fresh veggies just right out of the yard? So in summary, he was able to have cucumbers 6 weeks earlier by planting them in May for July harvest. And he transplanted the tomatoes and peppers in August to harvest in late fall. And the snow peas, carrots, and beets were direct planted as seeds in late July or August to be harvested in spring. Just remember, for planting purposes, that your seed starting date will be 6 weeks earlier than if you were direct seeding outside. So the value of being able to have a greenhouse, at least to grow plants, transplants, this chart of the brassica family of plants, do we get a, here we go, shows that you can be planting transplants at about the same time you would normally be direct seeding.
There you go.
Yeah, here we go. Here's our brassicas.
Okay.
This is our first show together, folks. So this gives you a 6-week jump on the growing season. So if you have the ability to make transplants, that means your starting date for these seeds will be 6 weeks earlier too. But there's other ways that you can extend your season that do not include a greenhouse. You can try to warm your soil up. We talked about, Sara mentioned putting that plastic down. That'll help keep the soil warm and keep it dry, and it'll keep your soil warm. If you have an area, I had to actually do that at my house. They built a fourplex next to me, and I have a typical 20 foot by 140 foot by 120 foot lot. And so one side of my yard doesn't get as much sun as it used to. So I put plastic in those 2 raised beds over there, and it did totally fine. The soil temperature was just really nice. So you can try to warm up your soil and protect those plants. You can put is it cloche?
Yep.
A cloche over your plants. You can drape spun polyester. They call that row cover too, to raise the temperature some. We also sell this at our Master Gardener plant sale, and it's a lot cheaper than if you're going to go buy it somewhere else. Just another shameless plug. You can do a low hoop house over your beds, cover them with plastic, or you can do the row fabric, and then this wall of water around the plants so the sun can heat the water and warm the plants. You can do a cold frame with a window, create a little small ground level greenhouse. And another common soil warming plan is to use black plastic, like we had mentioned before. So it does also help keep the weeds down. That was one of the things I've been fighting in my yard is horsetail, and I think we got it all. But that black plastic does help keep the weeds out and keep the moisture in. You want me to keep going, Sara?
Yes, please.
All right. Okay. So for planning purposes, okay, first of all, this chart, it seems like a lot, but it's just a way to plan things. So, but on the chart, having a chart like this, it's invaluable. So this one came out of a book, Vegetable Gardening, but you can find similar charts online at the library. So the dots represent dates when you would start a transplant. The X is for
seeding.
I'm sorry. Well, I'm reading here. You're right. Direct seeding. But I'm sorry. The dots, there's dots and X's and slashes. So the dots represent dates for direct seeding. The slash marks are for when you would start a transplant. There we go. And the X is for when you should plant a transplant outdoors. And then the yellow bar is for how long the direct seeded crop should be grown. The green bar is for how long a transplant should be grown. And that orange bar is your harvest window. There's orange bars that are both end of a few of these lines. And at the start, it indicates a crop that it can be overwintered, like Brussels sprouts, collards, and carrots, for example. So it's just another example of a schedule you might find online. And what's kind of neat about this one is that the transplants you start in March will be ready to plant in the garden at about the same time you would normally be direct planting. All right, brassicas. Many people love to grow these. Broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, and so on. So a lot of people do like to grow broccoli, and they plant a bunch of plants all at the same time. And that means when harvest time comes, you have to eat a lot of broccoli at the same time. Not only that, broccoli can also produce those side shoots after you cut off the main head, so you have even more broccoli. It'd be better to have several different planting dates instead, like that succession planting, so you can enjoy it all summer. Cabbage, cauliflower, kale should all be spread out over the growing season for the same reasons. Now, radishes, a few at a time is better than all at one time. That way they don't get woody and go to seed. All right, cucurbits. They're like cucumber squash family. The chart has suggested starting time, some as transplants. Please note these plants can sometimes be object to be transplanted. So using like a biodegradable pot, like one made from newspaper, we've had the same thing happen here. If we buy a start, or I do a start and it's in a pot and I take it out of my pot, it does not like that. It's just, it dies. So last year what I did, I took some newspaper and just put it inside of a pot, like a planter, and I got it wet so it formed the same shape as the pot. I put my dirt in there, put my seeds in there, and I put that right in the ground because it starts kind of degrading anyway before you get it outside, and everything went great from that. So, and tomatoes, as we talked about before, really need to be transplanted. This chart shows the possible harvest dates for cultivars of different days to maturity. For a 90-day tomato, you really need to get the plant in the ground before the end of May. And this is where preparing your garden in the fall can really help. If your garden's at a higher elevation, you can see the planting and harvest dates are going to be pushed further out. And for example, where a late spring didn't warm the soil enough until June 21, the first tomato wasn't ripe until September 5th. So if you're going to grow your own tomatoes, and remember the plant sale has hundreds of tomatoes, that's on May 11th. When do you start the seeds for your transplants? In a greened house, in a heated greenhouse, you can start them like 50 to 72 days before you're going to transplant in the garden. So around April 1st, plus or minus 10 days. If you don't have a greenhouse, the recommendation is 75 to 95 days before transplanting. And then this will give your plants a little time to get big enough to transplant. You're going to start them in small pots, and then you're going to be up potting to larger and larger pots. And that's very normal and typical with tomatoes. And then finally, your hard work is all going to pay off.
Woohoo!
So doing some winter gardening in the winter can be really rewarding. In order to be successful at winter gardening, keep in mind you need knowledge of your garden's microclimate, your soil, varieties that are going to work well, and ways to protect your plants. Winter vegetable production at the small farms and gardens west of the Cascades is a great resource. The name of this and other resources will be found at the end here. And then finally, there's a chart for some of the vegetables that have been successfully grown in the winter in our area. So in my own yard, I'm over in the Highlands area, so we get quite a bit of sun over here, but I still have stuff that I can grow all winter long, whether it's sunny or not. I can do carrots, parsnips, and beets, and then kale, and then I can do cabbage if I get it harvested before Christmas or around the holiday season. If I get it before it gets to January, I'm going to be safe. But gardening is an experiment. Try something new. You know, if you haven't tried it, you can try a few things out and see how things go in your yard. So for successful seed planting, just don't forget to plan ahead on that. Keep notes on how things go. List your successes and what didn't work out, and then what you are recommending that you do the next season. So in summary, knowing when to plant, it's the key to success. And for that, you need to know your growing zone, your seeds, whether you want to do direct planting or transplants, and how succession planting might work for you. And extending the growing season might be part of your plan. And you might refer back to like the specific examples of brassicas, cucurbits, and tomatoes, and then give winter gardening a try. We do have several excellent resources on our website. Any questions out there? That's a lot of info to take in.